Hello and welcome to the Valley. Today I am your host, Janet Michael. It is Extension Office Friday, so we are on the Zooms today with Elizabeth Baldwin. She is a unit coordinator and an associate extension agent based in Page County. And Elizabeth told me before we started recording, we're talking about soil samples today. And I have to share with you a faux pas that I did, Elizabeth. So when I first started taking the Master Gardener classes pre-pandemic, I always called it dirt. And I was quickly corrected that I should not say dirt, that it is soil. So I am so glad that you're going to reinforce me using the word soil today when we talk about getting samples of it.
Absolutely. Dirt is misplaced soil, but I always have folks tell me dirt is dead and soil is living. So there you go.
It's one of those services that the extension office offers to people that I don't know it is available or why they should get it. All of the benefits of understanding what kind of soil you have in your yard, it's pretty important.
Yes, it is. Probably the most basic reason that folks would want to take a soil test is to improve like plant health or production. So if they have a lawn or a garden, or of course, farmers and folks with pasture or cropland would like to take a soil sample to grow better plants, healthier plants. And it's also really helpful in troubleshooting things. So if folks call our office and they're having trouble growing something in their garden, that's usually one of the first questions that we ask is when was the last time that you had taken a soil sample. It's also helpful in reducing costs. So some folks, unfortunately, maybe every year in their lawn, they just go ahead and fertilize at a certain time of year. And oftentimes maybe it's not needed. So they're spending extra money that they don't have to. Another unfortunate side of that is having too many nutrients that could cause some pollution in our waterways and things like that from over applying fertilizer. So there's a lot of positives to taking a soil test, and there's not really any negatives I could think of other than the time and effort to take one.
Because once you get the results, most everything is fixable. It's not like you're going to get the results and it's going to be move. That's not how it works.
Almost all things can be remedied through some additional inputs that you could put in or some things you can hold off from doing. You're absolutely correct. Most all things can be fixed.
I never really thought about it though from a lawn perspective. I have always thought about it from our tomatoes aren't doing well in the garden. Or a couple of years ago, I had an issue with some of my coneflowers. They bloomed, but then they turned black and all of them died. And I couldn't figure out why. I always think of it more from a gardening perspective, but what you say about grass makes a lot of sense as well.
Yes, and there are, I must admit, I'll share this personal bit about myself. My personal lawn, I mow it because it grows, but it has lots of weeds and it's green and I love it. And that's all that matters to me. But there are lots of folks who are lawn enthusiasts and really take a lot of pride in their lawn. And maybe they're fertilizing and they're using lots of chemical inputs every year. And so it's really important that they do a soil test to see if they're really needed. And then on the flip side of that, there are folks who ask sometimes, hey, I'm really having trouble keeping grass growing in my lawn, or I have lots of bare spots or a lot of problems, or I've moved into a new home and I can't get my grass to grow. So taking a soil test is really great in trying to establish a new lawn, cover up some bare spots that you might have.
Are they difficult to do?
They are not. They are easy to do. The first thing to do, so one thing to mention for farmers or for folks who are producing a crop that they're planning to sell. So if you sell at a farmer's market or sell to neighbors, friends, whoever, taking and submitting a soil sample is free. There's no cost. There is a $10 cost for lawn and garden samples for homeowners. So it's fairly inexpensive, especially if you're planning to apply fertilizer. You may or may not need it. So $10 can go a long way in preventing that. But you can go to any extension office. There's also a few farm stores in our area who have the sample forms and boxes on behalf of the extension office that you can go there and pick up. So that would be your first step. You could stop in at your local extension office. All extension offices have these. It's a paper form that you fill out with your information, a little bit of information about what plant you're trying to grow, a vegetable garden or a lawn or a pasture field or a corn crop. and you fill out that information, and then there's a little cardboard box that comes with it as well. And we also have soil probes that you can borrow. So it's a long metal tube that you can stick in the ground, and it'll take a little core sample. And so you will want to take multiple ones across the area you're planning to grow something in. So lots of little cores, 10 or 15, stick them in a bucket, mix them up with your hands, and then fill up the little cardboard box. And once you've done all that, you mail your stuff in, and in a couple weeks, you'll get your results back. So it's something that if you only have a couple of samples to take, it's something that you can do in 30 minutes, an hour, on an afternoon, and it's not too big of a ask or too difficult. And if anybody has questions or gets started and thinks, oh, I maybe need some help with that, that's what we're here for, and they can always call us or reach out, and we can provide more details or more assistance as it's needed.
Why get so many of them in so many different places?
That is a wonderful, wonderful question. So, soil, when we think about soil, there's a lot of it out there, right? So, I've heard folks estimate before that an acre of soil, so an acre of land of property, an acre is about the size of a football field. The top 6 inches of that weigh about 2 million pounds. So there's about 2 million pounds in the top 6 inches of a football field. So that's a lot of soil. So if we just go out and we take one core from one spot, we're really not getting a good picture of all of the soil that's there. So our results are only going to be as good as the sample that we take. And so when we're taking the time to do this, we want to make sure that we're trying our best. So we want to get what we call a representative sample. And that just means we want it to really represent everything that's going on in our garden or our lawn. So you'd want to zigzag across, take several samples to try to get a good overall kind of average picture of what the soil's like in that area.
That makes sense because it does absorb. So it's not like if you have a particular issue in one tiny spot of your lawn or your garden, you get some rain, things spread out. Like you were saying earlier, runoff, things along those lines. Just because something looks one way in one part of your lawn doesn't mean it's not at some point going to spread to other parts.
Yeah, and we also tell folks if you have, especially in fields or when we think about farming, but also in your lawn and garden, if you have a lot of different areas, like I worked with one homeowner earlier in the year that has their house is on a really big slope. So their front yard sits at the bottom and their backyard is at the top. And they mentioned they feel like both areas are really different, like they've had trouble in one spot and the other. So in that case, we recommend that they do two samples, one from the front yard and one from the back, because they seem very different and they might choose to treat them differently. So the front yard may need things that the backyard didn't, or vice versa. We also try to get folks, encourage them to avoid weird areas. I know that's a very technical term, right?
Like where your gutter
Um,
empties or things like that.
Yes, absolutely. If you're somebody who has a compost area in your garden area, you probably don't want to go and take a big sample of compost. That would probably skew your results. So absolutely, spots that are a little bit unusual or would maybe throw off your results, avoid those and try to get averages.
That makes a lot of sense. Now that I'm thinking about, because we have a couple of weird spots like where the gutters come off, and we also are one of, I think, only 3 houses in all of Middletown proper that still have a septic tank. So we have where the distribution box goes. There are different parts of our backyard. Like we can see green lines where the lines go out through so we know when it's working and when it's not, and all of those sorts of things. But you may not necessarily want to take a sample right over top where the septic tank is.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. And so, a sort of a similar thought when we think about folks who have animals, livestock in a pasture or a field, folks who have like hay in a ring, and that's where the animals congregate, they're eating. That's not a great spot to take a sample to. That would skew your results because maybe there's not a lot of grass growing there, or there's a lot of animal manure and waste, things like that, that might skew your results. So, any places that are unusual in a field or your lawn or your garden, it's best just to pass over them and go to the next spot.
Let's take a break. When we come back, let's talk about the results, what they might mean, and how you can also help us when we get these results back. Explain what they mean and what we should do. Can we do that in the next segment?
Absolutely. That sounds great.
We are on the Zooms for Extension Office Friday. Elizabeth Baldwin is joining us. She is the unit coordinator and associate extension agent based in Page County. We're talking about soil samples today. We're going to talk about your results in just a couple of minutes.
This Tuesday, April Davis will change the world. She doesn't know that yet. All she knows is that she went to justserve.org and volunteered an hour of her time. Browsing through dozens of service opportunities in her community, April decided to spend her Tuesday evening serving dinner to mothers and their children at a transitional house. She doesn't know she'll be serving a particular mother and daughter who will be spending their first night in this home. April doesn't know that the hot meal she'll serve is the first this mother and daughter will have had in a week, or that the simple smile she'll offer as she serves them will help them realize that things are going to be all right. Which is why this Tuesday, April Davis will change the world. See the difference you can make. Sign up for service opportunities in your community. Visit justserve.org.
Welcome back to the Valley. Today, I am your host, Janet Michael. It is Extension Office Friday. We are on the Zooms with Elizabeth Baldwin. She is Unit Coordinator and Associate Extension Agent based in Page County. We're talking about soil samples today, why they're important, and not just important for your garden, Elizabeth. We talked a good bit in the first segment about they're good for your lawn, they're good for farmers, they're good for people that have an acre or two and are going to plant corn, things along those lines. Everybody should get one, I feel like.
Yes, I would encourage that. Anybody that has soil and wants to grow something, it's always a good idea to do a soil sample.
So I do my sample, I put it in the little cardboard box, and then I return it to the extension office. Is that how it works?
So you actually can mail the sample yourself on the form. And some offices may handle this differently, but our office has folks mail their own sample. And on the form, there'll be the address that you mail it to. So you can send it, I always tell people send it the cheapest postage possible. You can even put it in a padded envelope. It doesn't necessarily have to go in a box if you want to. That's usually how I send mine just because it's cheaper and it's just dirt, it's just soil. So I'm not super worried about it. And then once you mail your sample in, I always tell people to give it 2 to 3 weeks, especially during busy seasons. But there are times that I've had folks who send a sample in on Monday and get results before Friday. So the lab is usually really quick. I'm really on top of things. They do only email results. So you do have to provide an email address on the form and they will email you your results. So that's one of the ways it comes back so quickly. They don't have to wait on snail mail. And if there's any folks who, for whatever reason, maybe don't have an email address or don't wish to provide it, they can use the agent in their office, or we also have access to the online database that they put all these results in. So if people get the results back, they can call me or their local office, whoever they wish, and can say, hey, I got my results back. I need help with that. And I'm able to pull their results up on my computer and walk them through it through a phone call, or we're always happy to meet with people in person as well.
And when you talk about them going off to the lab, that's Virginia Tech, right? That's a completely above board testing facility.
Absolutely, yes. So these get sent to the soil testing lab on campus at Virginia Tech, and our folks there in the lab run the samples and get the results. Yes, definitely accredited lab information that you can trust.
I can see where the results come back and people think it's in a foreign language. So, how do you start to decipher what's good and what's bad?
So I will admit sometimes the results can be a bit difficult to look at just on first glance. They do have a separate sheet that you can pull up that they have a guide to reading your results. It's called your Soil Test Report Simplified. The soil test that Virginia Tech's lab offers tests for a lot of different parameters in the soil. So it tests for phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, zinc, manganese, boron, copper, soil pH. And then there's a couple of extra tests that folks could pay, I think, $2 a piece to have either their organic matter tested or something called soluble salts. And that's not something that most people need to test, but some folks who have had issues with over-fertilization or have some really specific problems sometimes will recommend that they add that on. But when they get their results back, all of those nutrients I just listed will be across the top of the sheet in a chart. And so they use these letter abbreviations, and I think that's what sometimes confuses folks.
It looks way
They
too much
have
like science.
it does. It does. You are absolutely correct. So those letter abbreviations, they start out with VH stands for very high, and then they work their way down to L for low. They'll have each of those nutrients, and then it'll tell you like VH for very high. There's high, high plus, medium, medium plus, medium minus, low. But those things, I always tell people it's great to understand that and read that, but those are not in my opinion, the most important piece of the results. You can look through and see where each of your nutrients are at, all of your macro and micro minerals, those magnesium and boron and calcium I was talking about. Those they'll list as either just sufficient and they use SUFF, or they'll list those as deficient. And then after you read through all of that and you think, what in the world does this mean? At the bottom, there is a little paragraph that will tell you recommendations. And that's the part that will tell you, we recommend that you apply this type of fertilizer in this amount, so many pounds per 1,000 square feet. Or if your soil pH is off, they'll give you a recommendation for lime. So for gardeners, it would be so many pounds per 1,000 square feet. For farmers, it would be listed in like pounds or tons per acre.
That is really helpful because I could see where somebody would get that report and say, okay, all of these things are very high, or these three things are very high, but that might be okay. We think of it being, oh no, they're too high. That's not always how it actually is.
Yes, that is true. So on these samples, anything that's listed as very high or high, they just will not recommend that you apply any more of that. So it may not be detrimental to your garden, but anything that's listed as low or medium, there will be a recommendation for you to apply a fertilizer that contains that nutrient in it.
And the pH is a lot more important than people think that it is because it has a serious impact on different vegetables and different plants and what you can and can't grow based on the pH level in your soil.
Yes, soil pH is the most important part. I always tell folks that lime is the cheapest fertilizer that you could purchase, which you may not need it. You'll have to look at your recommendations. But if you only can afford or only want to choose to do one thing, the most important thing would be to correct your soil pH. And so there's a lot of science behind it, but the idea is that the soil pH is what, like you said, some plants like different pHs, and then also the soil pH, whether it's acidic or basic, if it's out of the range that we like, it could prevent your plant from taking up some of the nutrients that are in the soil. So even though you might have very high potassium or very high phosphorus, that it's all there in your soil and ready to use, if your pH is out of whack, it makes it unavailable to the plant. That can be frustrating, but if you get your pH in check, that might be your limiting factor.
Pastas are acidic and they were not doing well. And instead of getting a soil sample, which would have saved me so much trouble, I started emptying what was left in my coffee grounds or my coffee pot on and around the plant. That worked great for a while, but the longer I did it, the worse that it got because I went too far to the other side. So
I
having had a number might have been beneficial to me.
helped you. Absolutely. And I love that story, Jan. I hate that happened to you, but I had two instances. I've actually worked with two folks in the last year, one this year and one last year, who had a similar story, but in the opposite way. So lots of folks have heard through the years that wood ash is really good. It can help raise your soil pH. And in Virginia, most soils typically are on the acidic side. Over time, might need lime. And so I had two folks tell me nothing will grow in my garden anymore, nothing at all. And so I said, have you done a soil test? And so they did soil test and their pH was very high, like higher than I've ever seen before. And I was trying to ask, what kinds of things do you do? And both of them were like, every year I have a wood burning stove. I empty my wood ashes and I spread them over my garden to help raise my soil pH. And I was like, well, you have raised your, you've done an excellent job and you have raised it far beyond the parameters. So you definitely can go too far either way. And so it's always helpful to do a soil test and check. And so we recommend people to do a soil test about every 3 years. For some crops, every year, or if you've had a problem, like in these folks' case, their pH was so out of whack that we said, hey, apply these things and then next year definitely do another one and see if we're heading back in the right direction. So it's not a one and done thing, but it's not something you have to do every year unless you had something you really needed to correct.
And that's a good point because I think most people would say, oh my gosh, I went too far this way. So I'm going to now correct. And then 3 months later, 3 weeks later, they take another soil sample. It took time to get to that point. It's going to take time to level itself back off.
Yes, and this is a little bit different idea, but same thing about taking time. So the fall is actually a great time to take a soil sample because some of these things take a little bit of time to work. So lots of folks maybe think about soil sampling in the spring when they're thinking about starting their garden. And there's no wrong time of year to take a soil sample, but the fall gives you plenty of time to prepare and plan for the spring. And something like lime, if your soil pH is too low and you're trying to raise the pH so you have a successful gardening season, it can take maybe a minimum of 3 months for the lime to begin to break down in your soil and raise the pH, 3 to 6 months for it to start working. And then it takes several years for it to totally degrade and you need some more of it. But lime is a mineral, so it takes a little bit of time to break down and start working. So you do a soil sample, you need lime, you find out, you apply it in the fall, it'll be doing its wonderful work at raising your soil pH by the time springtime is here. So it's a good time to find out what you need and be planning and preparing for the spring and sunny, warm weather.
Tomatoes in particular are very finicky about pH and about the soil that you put them in.
They are, and we do sometimes, and I understand this thought process, but there are some folks who take a sample in the spring, find out that their pH is off or other things, and they apply it, and then they still don't have good results, and then they're frustrated. And in those cases, it was because they didn't give it enough time to work. So if you took your sample in the spring, you applied the lime, and then a couple weeks later, you planted those tomatoes, the lime's not had time to do its job and bring things where they need to be.
You got to really think long term and big picture.
Yes, you do. Some of our nutrients that we apply to the soil or our fertilizers are a little bit long lasting, and then there's others that are volatile. They move around in the soil a lot. So it is always something that you have to think about in the back of your mind or each year as you're thinking about taking care of your garden or plants, especially plants like shrubs, trees, and things like that that we're not planting every year. Sometimes they get forgotten about. So when you fill out your soil sample, there is a spot to mark what you're growing. And so some of those, if you have trees, shrubs, or things like hydrangeas or acid-loving plants like blueberries, things like that, you can mark that on the form and they'll give you a specific recommendation based on your specific plant.
And that's the cool thing about just the extension office in general. So I can get that email and figure out what it means. But most people, I think, get those results back and they're like, yeah, this is generic. I know it's my soil, but they don't understand what it is I want to do. They get to call you. They can go to their local extension office if they're in Winchester or they're in Berryville or wherever they are. They can go in and say, hey, these are my results and I understand what they mean, but this is what I want to do. So explain to me how I do that. You can do that for them.
Absolutely. If folks have questions about how to grow certain things, even outside of their soil sample, we can provide assistance on that. One thing to mention too, when you get your results back, anybody that has bought fertilizer, or if you're familiar with it, there's 3 numbers that are on a fertilizer bag. So lots of folks are familiar with 10, 10, 10. That's an easy one we can think about. And so there's a little bit of math sometimes involved, and that's something we can help you with as well. So your results that we give you will be pounds of the nutrient. So for our lawn and garden, we do give pounds of specific types of fertilizer. For our farm ones, it just gives pounds of nutrients. When you buy fertilizer, those 3 numbers are the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium or the potash, and that's actually stands for the percentage of that product that is that nutrient. So 10, 10, 10 is 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 10% potassium. So if you only need a half a pound of nitrogen for your lawn and you buy 10, 10, 10, you might be thinking, how do I calculate to get that half a pound? So there's a little bit of math involved. It's very simple, but sometimes I have folks that call me and say, hey, can you just calculate and tell me how much to apply? And that's absolutely something that we can do and we're happy to help with.
Yeah, hello, that would be me. I don't do math in any way on any day that ends in Y. So I would be the one calling and saying, okay, I need you to tell me exactly.
Absolutely. And we don't mind at all. I always tell people there's nothing that you can ask that is too silly. There's no silly questions. We're always happy to help and try to point folks in the right direction or find you answers. If we're unable to answer your question, we likely know somebody who can and can get you in the right path.
I will put links to all of our local extension agency offices in the show notes page so that people, no matter where they're listening, can find out where their offices are located and links to where you talk a little bit, I think, about soil samples and things on your website. But thank you for taking the time and educating me on this today. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
If you're looking for something fun to do, one of my favorite weekends of the year, Luckett's. is happening at the Clark County Fairgrounds. So I will be there Friday. Well, as you're listening today, I'm there right now. It's the beauty of recording in advance. Saturday and Sunday, head over and find yourself some treasures. Otherwise, I will meet you back here on Monday with a brand new episode of The Valley Today, just a few minutes after noon.